Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. If you're a regular listener of the show, then you know that last month marked the 1-year anniversary of the documentary series, Let Us Pray, a Ministry of Scandals. It's a series that I was privileged to be a part of. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to have conversations with fellow cast members from the series to talk about their experience being involved in the documentary, the impact it's had on their lives, and some behind-the-scenes stories you may have never heard. Well, today I'm wrapping up that round of conversations with Amanda Fay. Amanda was featured in the series talking about Agape boarding school and the troubled teen industry at large. And we had a deeper conversation on today's episode, talking a little bit, yes, about the documentary and about advocacy work. We also spent a lot of time talking about the tension she feels working within a church context and also being an advocate, talking about issues of religious abuse and even religious misconceptions that people have, and the pressure she feels from church members and evangelicals as she fulfills that mission. And it's a really heartbreaking but powerful and complex conversation that I'm really privileged to have had with Amanda, and I hope you'll really appreciate it. It really turned into a heart-to-heart in a lot of moments of the show. And with that said, there's a lot of times where I dive deep into practical, tactical tips. This episode really wasn't filled with that. It was just two friends talking, and I really appreciated that. But I do want to make one thing clear, because it's something I would normally in the show stop and talk about and give some step-by-step. One of the things we talk about is the frustration of when you come across a case where it's legally, there's nothing able to be done, or past statute of limitations, and so on and so forth. I just want to make clear, since I didn't pause the episode then and say this, if you're listening, always take these cases to the police. I know Amanda knows this. I know it's something we kind of brushed over in the conversation. And so it sounds like, oh, I heard something. There's nothing that can be done. It's done. I do want to make clear, like, anytime a story of sexual abuse is reported to you directly, anytime a victim comes forward, anytime that you have information that you feel would be helpful in a case, take it to the police and let them decide if it's helpful. Let them decide if there is something legally that can be done, because I cannot tell you the amount of times I've had interviews on the show where the guest has come on the show, shared their story, and then found out that there was a legal avenue they could take that they did not know was on the table. It can be easy to feel like we know all about the statute of limitations, that we know all about the different laws and legislation in our area, but it changes all the time, and there could always be a window for justice. And if there's not, and you're absolutely certain about all those other things, putting in a police report puts it all on record, where if another victim comes forward, which again happens all the time, they can reopen that case, they'll see a prior police report, and they can reopen it, they could talk to you, and they can get more context for the case they're currently dealing with. So always, always, always go to law enforcement in situations where you believe there's sexual abuse. And feel free to also go to a lawyer and figure out other options there. I just want to say that. Also, before we get into the episode, I want to give a shout out to two incredible things I got in the mail. One, St. Martin's Press sent me this beautiful complimentary copy of The Evangelicals by Sarah McCammon. It's been on my reading list for a while, and I'm so excited to finally dive into it. It's been referenced in the Teen Vogue article with Olivia Plath. It's been referenced by Kristen Dumais and so many others. I'm really excited to dive into this book. And I have to give a shout out to my friend Candy Carpenter for sending me this gorgeous signed poster of their album artwork for Demonology. Demonology is one of my absolute favorite musical albums in a long time. And being friends aside, loving their perspective aside, it's a beautiful album. It's so perfectly made, and I'm listening to every track like almost every week. I love the album and love this poster. It's available on the website. I can link to that in the show notes as well. But really appreciate Candy coming on the show. If you haven't heard that episode, go back and check it out. With all that PSA aside, let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation with Amanda Fay, who was featured in the documentary series Let Us Pray, a Ministry of Scandals, available to stream now on Max. But for now, stream our interview starting right now. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm really interested for people who don't know your perspective and haven't heard kind of your background. Could you give like a 10,000 foot view of kind of what your early experience with the IFB and Agape itself was really like?
My first memories in the church, I grew up in Jack Hyles's mega church in Northwest Indiana, Hammond, Indiana, First Baptist Church, often considered to be the foundation for the independent fundamental Baptist movement. He split from the Southern Convention when he had disagreements and he didn't want to listen to them as a young buck. He wanted to go his own way, forge his own path. My first recollections was my mother going out to witness and visit with her foster club ladies, and they had a teenager there who would help this very, very, very ancient old lady watch dozens of kids at a time. It wasn't really regulated, and this teenage girl would always bring me to the bathroom and do things and paddle me for these things and take me back and always promise that it will never happen again. Don't tell anyone. That's my first memory. My second memory in the church is Jack Hyles losing his temper, not once, but two separate times, and pointing our family out in the mezzanine underneath the balcony. And you need to go home and take your kids and beat the fire out of them. And so that's what happened. My sister's finger turned purple. Very, very strict, very rigid. But it was very caste based of white kids and then inner city kids. And so, yeah, you could be Hispanic and African American and go to the Hammond Baptist schools, but really the place for you was supposed to be City Baptist. Yeah. There was a lot of racism, even when I was little to when I was growing up. And because of who I was, and because my parents were told what to do in the church, and they would help with these volunteer jobs, we were considered of the caste to be in the church in all the services, and we weren't supposed to go to junior church. Mm-hmm. So when you have 5 kids that you're trying to keep quiet and still for very boring hour-long sermon that the kids don't understand, we'd run all over the place, and we'd get in trouble for that, and the pastor would get in trouble for that. But I grew up under Jack Hyles's ministry. I grew up under Jack Scott's ministry. That's all I knew. I knew that we were the best, and to hell with all the rest. If they're not doing anything in our path, and then everybody who had left Northwest Indiana to go serve in Tennessee or to go serve in Ghana, Africa, doesn't matter where they were from, they were kind of missionaries, because the best place in all the world was Hammond, Indiana, First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana. And it was very, very, very difficult as an adult to separate all of the truths from all of the fiction, because the fiction far outweighed anything that was logical.
For you early on, like, I know obviously when you're a really little kid, like you said, boring sermon, don't understand it, I'm here to play and run around. As you got older, and I would assume that would be in like the SCOP years for a lot of that older period, how much of the teaching of the we are better, we are the place to be, how much did you take that to heart? Or did you ever have this, like, because I only know you now. I know you in this context where, like, you are a questioner, you are someone that asks, and sees through this stuff. Was that you then? Like, were you constantly questioning? Did you constantly see through the BS, or did you kind of take it at face value in the beginning?
I had little things that made me question, but you're not allowed to question. So I was never very forward with it. When I wasn't allowed to play video games because girls clean and cook, and that's your job. So you can't ever get a turn on the PlayStation because video games are for boys. I argued that. When I learned how to do my laundry, and then I tried to teach my younger brother how to do his laundry. No, you're a girl. That's your role in life. But he gets big enough to learn. I questioning, why do I have to do all these unfun things all the time? I can't just be my age. And in high school, junior high and high school, when I was working for the pastor's school, we had to set a whole week of school so we could work the entire time to be free labor at pastor's school. And I worked in the bathroom brigade with our little pinstripe red and white outfits. A lot of fun in that job. But I was talking to a girl, Heather, and she was discussing some literature she'd read. And we were discussing a lot of the women's rights movements. And she was a little farther along than I was. But what she was vocalizing, I was just, oh my goodness. Why? Why is it? And it's, if I'm less than a male, and that's what I was realizing is God created us equal at the foot of the cross. And that put more into perspective, because I had a lot of internalized racism because I grew up with it all around me. Not that I'm going to say my parents were like that at all. My parents are great. But when you see it practiced by everybody, you have a lot of internalized stuff that you have to work through as an adult. So I had questions, but I was very much always a goody two shoes, a teacher's pet, an A+ person. You could call me a snitch, but I didn't care about the opinions of people around me. I wasn't very good with my own peers of my age. I didn't know how to communicate. So my friends were kids above and below who also did or did not fit into with their own classes. And we just kind of sat at our own misfits table and we owned it and we loved it. And it was very difficult because at First Baptist of Hammond, you had a pecking order where we were the best and all the other churches were less than. And close to better were other colleges like Wildemar, like South Carolina, other churches and other organizations. And they were a little good, but they were never as good as Hammond Baptist and First Baptist Church. But within that pecking order, where we'd go to summer camps and make fun of other girls for their culottes and their they looked culty, but we were culty too. So like, oh my goodness, look at them. They look so churchy. It's like we're the same thing. We swim in t-shirts and culottes underneath our bikinis. It was ridiculous. But we had a huge totem pole, a pecking order within our church too. And it was always, if you're not on the top, somebody else is, and they're going to beat you down. And it was just constant. I saw it all the time and I questioned it, and you're just not allowed to, because so much of, if you question, if you don't obey, then are you really saved? And they'd say that all the time. Are you really saved? Are you really saved? So growing up, I got saved and baptized on 3 separate occasions. And even still older as a college student, as an adult, am I really saved? Am I really saved? Because you're always questioning, not that you're saved, though that's at your age, that's what you're thinking, but it's the leadership has made mistakes. The leadership has said bogus stuff. The leadership is wanting complete, absolute submission because only they know what's right. And you're not allowed to dig into the scriptures yourself. They provide the materials you can study. They provide the only translation you're allowed to use. They provide the speaker tapes and the CDs, and it's padding their own pockets when they are some of the producers of this material. So they controlled all of our intake. They controlled all of our output. And it was hard, but when I left and went to Missouri, I was able to kind of branch out and breathe for the first time.
Tell me a little bit about arriving at Agape, and were you going there initially for like a long-term employee? Were you going there initially for like a summer? Like, how did you end up at Agape from kind of the Hiles world?
Getting out of that church that I grew up with and all of those peers and all of the pastors and all of the assistants and the staff, that was a breath of fresh air because I was an adult. I could do whatever I want. And then landing in Agape was like landing in a bomb shelter for the apocalypse, where everything you're doing is watched. You can't fart in a room without 10 people pointing their fingers at you. I was constantly being watched. I was constantly being monitored. I couldn't have a conversation with my husband in my own house because they had their own phones set up in every house and they considered it office spaces. So on taxes, it was weird. We couldn't claim rent, though our paychecks were so low, and they claimed them as office spaces. So they put in their intercom phone systems in our homes. We were not allowed to unplug them or turn them off, and they would eavesdrop on our conversations. From the moment I got there, I just was so stressed. I had never left my church. I had never moved away. And it was, for anybody who's left a super, super culty atmosphere and gone on their own, even if you're going to a similar culty atmosphere, which is what I was doing, there was a lot of coming to Jesus moments where I don't even know what I am, who I am. You know, I know my name, but it was such an identity crisis to have left one big cult, but then landing in another and realizing I can ask questions because I don't have any established respect for you, Kathy Clemenson. I don't have any established respect for you, Robert Graves, and all these other people. So when you say things that don't make sense to me, you're still a stranger and I'm going to ask you about it. And from the very beginning, I had 5 different wives approach me to work in their departments. Well, I'm not. I'm still unpacking. Big culture shock, mega area, moving to a town of 1,215 people. I still remember 1215. It's grown since. It's big culture shock. Let me just settle. Got there in November, but by the time March, I still hadn't worked anywhere. 2-week honeymoon. I was unpacking. That was my excuse to I was just so unsettled. And then to be told by Kathy Clemenson 3 separate times. The third time was in the dining hall with everybody present all around. Anyone can eavesdrop. And she said, you need to work or else. And what do you mean? If you don't work for us, then we're going to fire your husband and you're going to have to leave. And you don't want him to be homeless, do you? You don't want to be the reason why your husband left a ministry that he's serving God in and is now homeless, and you're going to be without any provisions, and nobody's going to want you. Nobody's going to want to hire you. Nobody's going to want to hire a man whose wife pulled him out of the ministry. So you have to show up. I don't want to. My husband piped up and he says, no, she doesn't want to work, so she doesn't have to. No. And she looked at me and she said, you will show up Tuesday. It opens at 9 or at 8 o'clock, but Miss Burton will be there at 9 o'clock and you can work with her then. And I had no choice. I was just given an assignment, and everyone said the wives of Agape were volunteers, but I was voluntold. I was assigned. This is where you're working now. You didn't embrace volunteering here at first. This is where you're going to work. Later, I asked her, well, I need some extra money. You're not paying us a lot. We can't actually afford groceries or health insurance or healthcare. When we both had the flu, we had to share our prescription because antibiotics. And then the doctor took generously and he decided to treat my husband for free because I was going to share my antibiotics. That was how poor we were. And she says, you don't need to work outside the home. We provide everything you need here. And I said, well, then I'll work from home. And she got so mad at me. Just the fact that I could be dependent on any other agency other than Agape. I had a really close friend there. She qualified for state assistance. And when she announced that to ma'am, she was Kathy Clements, and she was so happy we qualified. They raised her husband's pay by about 50 cents an hour so that they'd no longer qualify. And that was a deliberate move to keep you constantly dependent on your only employer, who's also a landlord, who also observes everything about you, who decides when you vacation, you have to come bring back a church bulletin, who everything was structured day in, day out, 7 days a week. You had a day off, but still on that day off, you'd be pulled into mandatory meetings and you were constantly being threatened with being fired. So it was suffocation from the beginning.
So when you're there, obviously your husband's a paid staff member, not paid well. You're voluntold, hey, go do this. But it sounds like from the beginning that even your husband saw there were some things that weren't right. And it seemed like he had your back in moments like that, like you just described. That's rare in that world. Obviously, like in retrospect, I'm sure there's things both of you would have done, differently, or left quicker, or called out certain things when you didn't. Like everybody who's been in this environment has that, like, oh, if I had said this sooner or left or realized they were bluffing about this sooner. Where do you think his mindset came from, where like he would actually have your back? Because most people in that meeting would be like, babe, stop being difficult, like just do what you need to do. Like, why do you think he had that like perspective of, no, she doesn't have to do what she doesn't want to do? Like, where do you think that came from?
In that moment, for that isolated incident that we're discussing, I think he could tell I was very distraught and I was starting to cry, and he was trying to stand up and protect me a little bit, but he's very much non-confrontational person still to this day. And he is very much a peacekeeper. So he would not go out of his way to say this isn't right, but he wouldn't stand for it. So he was pulled aside and said, you're not disciplining the boys enough. You need to be disciplining the boys more. You need to be rougher on them. You need to, in essence, mistreat them more. He says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I don't agree. I'm not going to do that. If somebody deserves, to write sentences or whatever the consequences were at the time, if somebody deserves that, then I'll assign it, but I'm not going to do what you want me to do. He'd see other guys tackle boys. We'd see Jurassic elbows all the time. And Julio Sandoval is a big proponent of that. And Brent Jackson once told us, I read every single review on Yelp, and he's all like sniffing, trying to keep it quiet. And I will tell you, every single one of those reviews, they're all true. We did those things, but we don't do them anymore. And so I read the back pages of Yelp, all those uncommon views, if you go on the secondary pages that we don't recommend these reviews, but I read them like, that's terrible stuff, Brent Jackson. I remember my brother's stories when he was at Agape for 2 years, and it was not a happy place.
No.
So him, my husband, it was hearing his wife say, we're supposed to stand up for Jesus, and this isn't right. And then being in the very precarious place of, if I stand out against them, we're going to be homeless. We're going to be destitute. We're not going to have anything. And we weren't at any kind of place where we could save up money for the future, because a lot of independent fundamental Baptist churches, they keep their staff on such a poverty level that they can't leave. They're dependent because they know there's no way we can even stay in our home for even one more month. If I leave this place, that is how broke we are.
Yeah.
And especially when you add a wife and kids and pets and et cetera, people get so desperate and they just despair of ever being able to leave. And so he would not do what they told him to do when it came to mistreating the boys. He had his very firm line. And some of the boys, the padded room, they'd prefer to be with James because they knew that James wouldn't beat them up. They knew that James wouldn't mistreat them. They knew it wouldn't be a day of constant belittling. They knew that James was just probably going to be on his phone, bored, reading books, grading papers, and that they were just going to be isolated. They weren't going to be going through further treatment. And it was difficult for him because he had to keep that job, but he also knew it wasn't right. And I wanted him to help me call agencies to report abuses, but he still wasn't brave enough yet. And it took him years and years after we left Agape to get to that point.
Looking at the mindset of other people who were there, because like you mentioned, people who, would go extremely hard on the kids or be very abusive, or, all the chokeholds and the tackling and the beatings and things. Do you think most of the people that were there were just inherently violent and they found an outlet for it and they enjoyed it? Do you think that it was taking out the frustration of being held there on other people? Like, why do you think and this isn't just Agape, this is like the troubled teen industry. You hear about these very abusive people that seem to take pleasure in torturing kids in these essentially unlicensed prisons. What do you think the mentality was of most of the staff? Like, why do you think there is that animosity that's there in almost all of these homes?
I would say most of the staff, I wouldn't say as violent. I would say the staff turnover, I calculated myself when there. Most of the staff didn't stay longer than 5 years. Most of them quit beforehand. And so the staff that stayed there, though, I would say those who had the tenure, those who had the longevity, those who'd been there for a long time, I would say yes, most of them were inherently violent. Most of them had either buckled under the strain of trying to separate, this is righteous, this is good, and this is downright child abuse. And they buckled under the strain of, you do what we tell you to do because we pay you, so you're going to abuse these children. And others were really, really much sadists. I struggle pronouncing masochists, but there's a whole community for people who like to hurt other people. It's the bondage community. You can join BDSM if that's your thing, but you don't take it out on little children. You don't force other kids and realize, oh, I'm an adult, I can't do that. So you, go beat him up. He looked at my daughter, or he looked at my wife, or I don't like him, he didn't turn in his stuff, or he lipped off of me, so beat him up. Make sure he can't walk, or stuff like that. So there's definitely some sadists at Agape, and the upper staff knew and condoned and approved. because they were the ones who'd be mentioned. You need to be more like such and such. You need to be more like so and so because he uses a firm hand, and you need to be firmer with these kids because if the kids were questioning, if the kids had room to breathe, then they had room to disobey. And so the harder handed, heavier handed, the stricter you were, the rougher you were on these kids, especially the young ones when they first come. That's why they strip them. They force them to have their heads shaved. And they're young without their shoelaces and stuff. It's complete deprivation of your rights, of your privacy. And if we can break your will from the beginning, you'll be obedient. And that's the whole thing. They break the will of the staff. They break the will of the kids. And there were some staff who were just downright just evil, disgusting, despicable. You'd see them, you'd get your heebie-jeebies up like, why don't I like you? And then you'd find out later, oh, that's why I don't like you. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people about Let Us Pray and kind of the national conversation. This is something you've been kind of talking about for a long time now, publicly. And I know there's many others who've been talking about the troubled tea industry publicly in a big way. I'm curious, and I don't think I've asked you this before, but when did you first get talked to about Let Us Pray and sharing, and what was the process of like stepping into that and sharing about the troubled teen industry on that level and getting to talk a little bit about kind of this world like that I think it's weird because like I feel like we all have these conversations and there's like a shared vocabulary and we've all been around the same types of environments and people, and so it's second nature. But it's also happening where like the general public is so in the dark about this stuff. So like what was that experience like being approached to talk about this? How did that happen? Like how'd you kind of get introduced to that project?
I was speaking out before anybody else was. Truthfully, I was speaking out long before everybody else was. I have messages on my phone. I was since even at Agape, after we left, I was nonstop. I did go through a few Facebook purges when we'd be retaliated against. At one point, Agape even called my husband's employers, and we hadn't been at Agape for years. And they tried to say, you're a fellow ministry, and just so you know, we don't approve of the stuff that your employee and his wife are posting and sharing. It's very defamatory, and we could sue them and lose a lot of money, and that would be horrible. So they're threatening his ministry that we're going to put you under the bus. It's going to draw a lot of not nice light on your employee, and people are going to ask, why would he defame such a good institution? Because they so long painted such a good picture. But I knew I had nothing to lose. Agape stripped me of everything. FBC Hammond taught me that I was always less than. I was always to serve a man, the umbrella method, which is totally unbiblical. God, husband, wife, children. That is so unbiblical. We're equally yoked. And to hear, number one, I'm less than. Number two, now I'm in a situation at Agape where I have the illusion of privacy, but my life is no better than some of these boys. Yeah, I don't get beaten up, but I don't even have a home to rest in. My friend, another friend, she contacted me years later. I'm so sorry, Amanda. My husband told me I didn't want to tell you while you were at Agape, but he was told to go to your bedroom at night when you were sleeping and make sure it was only you and your husband there and that you weren't having orgies with a bunch of random strangers. Just shocking the amount of control they had over you. So I had nothing else to give. I had nothing else to lose. Why protect what is wrong? And then every time I engaged with somebody not in that strict church or those IFB kind of mentalities, I came away thinking, they're so nice. They're so kind. They're so good. It's like righteousness. And they might even be atheists, who knows? But why can't fellow Christians that I grew up with be this nice? And I didn't have anything else to lose. So I was posting, I was sharing. My husband was contacted by numerous students, dozens of students. We were contacted. I had people reach out to me, grandmothers, parents reach out to me for my Yelp reviews. that Agape kept having taken down, and then I got threatened to be booted off of Yelp. There's nowhere you can go to share these things. So I just went to my social media. I'm only active on Facebook, so I was only ever sharing on Facebook. And through several purges of people threatening us, I'd have to delete all my stuff and then put us back on, delete all my stuff, put it back on, because it was insane leaving that. And then years went by. I was contacted by a lady named Sarah. She says, "Oh, we're interested in, this piece, blah, blah, blah." Nothing happened for about a year. And then, "Oh, hey, can we get you some tickets so you can film?" Sure. Okay. Well, I get to go back to Missouri. I get to find a flight. That'd be fun. I love airplanes. Basically, you say, if you're going to buy me airplane tickets anywhere, I will go. Love flying. So we showed up, filmed sundown to sunset, or sunrise to sunset. And it was a wonderful experience. I went to Agape again. I found another former wife there.
Was that your first time back since leaving?
That was my second time back.
Okay.
The first time was to visit somebody's wedding there. And I don't think it was at Agape campus. I think it was at her church, but it was the Bolivar region in Stockton. But that was my first time back at the Agape facility, because I don't feel safe there at all. And so with the film crew, we drove around, and I showed them, like, "Oh yeah, that's my house. I give it to the grandkids." And this is, and all these different stories. It was intriguing. Yeah. But Sarah reached out, and it was a year. And when people reach out to you for these things, you think it's really, really fast. Like, "Oh, someone's listening to my story." No, it's going to be years till it's out. Just breathe. It's going to be like legal cases. Don't get discouraged. There's just a whole backlog. You're going to be 3 to 5 years through the washing machine of this. It just don't. If you feel like no one's listening to you, or you feel you have dead ends, don't burn those bridges, because they're just on hold, or they're just waiting for bureaucracy and all the red tape, but it'll happen.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just talking with all the girls from the Blind Eye movement, and we were kind of talking about that. And I said, it's funny because there's these things that happen that people get really excited about, where it's like, this article's, just came out, or this thing happened, or this documentary came out, or this, this podcast started, or this channel's here. And there's all this excitement, and then it dies down, and everybody goes, nobody's talking about it anymore. Nothing's happening. All the things you just said. And those are the moments now for me where I'm like, something big is happening, because when it gets really quiet, that means that's when everybody's head down working on something. And I know that's been the case for me. Like, the times where, like, I'm posting the least is because I'm talking to lawyers, or I'm talking to survivors, or I'm building up a story of, all of this happening in the background that nobody sees. And the documentary was a lot like that, where it's like, I think they reached out to me in end of 2020. They had already been filming since like 2019. And then it came out 2023. So it's like, there's a lot of waiting. I'm curious for you, like, it's super cool. You got to go back to Agape, show around a bunch of stuff, like in film. Was there anything that you remember saying in an interview or filming specifically that you wish people could have seen? I think we all have this thing that we're like, "Oh, we talked about this, or we showed this. I wish everybody could have seen this because it was a really interesting or unique or, wild moment."
I remember I remembered when you were there at the gates, I wanted to flick them off, but I told them, "Turn your cameras off. I don't want to be filmed for this." And I think one of the ladies said, I see someone from the windows over there, and I could just picture Kathy Clemenson staring out her windows, wrists on her hips, staring at what this film crew is doing outside her gates in the big wrought iron Agape boarding school. And I made them put their cameras off and not film, and then I just flicked them off. And I just stared there. I was so mad. I wish they allowed me to film it. No, I wish I allowed them to film it, but I felt really bad. It's very difficult being a pastor's wife, knowing what you can, but to see an institution where they knew so many boys had been abused. They knew about the sexual assaults. They knew about the staff being in the impropriety of the staff among the kids and even among their own children. They didn't care. It was just a money thing for them and a control thing. This bunch of sadists who found we can torment people's wayward children, because if you have a rebellious teen, ship them off. That's easier than getting a therapist, having a family therapist, each of you getting your own individual therapy, get psychology, figure out what is wrong with this child. And sometimes what is wrong with my parenting and me as a person, that I'm having all of these reactions and reactive outbursts from my children. Yeah. So ship them off, pay $30,000, $60,000 a year, and you won't have to deal with that problem. But then they get sent to people who are just some of the worst. And some of them have great hearts. Most of them had a little pleasure in taking it out, and they always had a student or two that they couldn't stand. And I wish I allowed them to film me while I was flipping off Agape. That's something that I wish happened. Yeah. I was so stressed and distraught. I did meet with a staff lady there who revealed to me later that she herself had improper relations with a minor at Agape. And then on a boat or something. And then later on, when people were talking about it, the minor's older brother claimed it was him, because she didn't know that the minor was a minor still. She thought, well, I just thought he was older. You're 15 years older than this kid. That's improper. And second, you have a place of authority over a kid. You don't do that. That's so many different levels. She's like, I'm just so glad that they didn't. And you hear all these stories. You can't do anything about them. If you could, I would. But I remember she was there, like, what are you doing here? You're not staff here anymore. Oh, yeah, well, we rent one of the houses. And my friend, my sister, whatever. And to see how some people, even though they'd left, they couldn't actually escape. They always had to keep coming back to get a little bit of boost of, I'm glad we're not here, but I'm glad I'm still doing right. And are you okay with me, mom and dad? Are you okay with me, Agape dad, Agape mom, ma'am? Am I okay? Yeah. Even if they'd left.
Was that the story? The story with the staff member having this improper relationship with a student there, wasn't that investigated? I feel like I remember that, like, rumbling, like, I think 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago. I think I remember, like, there was a big, like, Agape was trying to prevent people from looking into it, but I don't know if I'm remembering the right story.
There was 5 staff members who did that over the course of 3 decades. No, I'm mistaken. There's at least 6. And that is only because I don't know of all the staff that was there before I was. I knew staff when my brother was a student.
6 that
I knew staff when we were there. But I know 5 to 6 different staff had improper relations with students, or improper relations with students. Whether and it doesn't matter whether it's assault or battery or any of that, all sexual nature and all, I have the authority, you don't have any. That story that I'm referring to wasn't covered by anybody. That was just private messages on my own phone, and people find me as they can confess anything to, so they will. But conversely, if I can ever do anything about it, I will, because the snitch I was growing up is still who I am now. I will blow a whistle if there's a whistle to be had.
Yeah.
But if you can't do anything, you can't do anything. Facts is facts. I deal in facts. So even if I'm told personally I did legal, I have to research that. But if I don't have any other evidence of that, and if what I have can't be used, then I'm stuck. Just wait until maybe something comes up in the future. Oh, if I ever know a victim, oh yeah, you know what? If you ever have a case, I can tell you this. I'll share this on the stand. But yes, when we were there, the staff I know while we were there. So one staff member knew that his own daughter was being abused and did nothing. And another staff member, the spouse, would sneak keys and have intimacy relations with a kid on campus. And who knows how long that grooming happened before they turned of age. Often they would claim they were of age, but it would happen beforehand. Another was on a boat. Another, he would be very, very threatening to the staff ladies themselves, especially the single staff. And they'd freak out, like, you can't have him around me. You can't have him around me. He threw a desk. I'm very frightened around him. Don't leave me alone. It happened. But everyone's suffocating. Everyone is dying. Everyone is like a bottled up soda with a mental stone, and they screw the lid on. Everyone's in that state of either you try to do something about it and nothing's going to get done because you can't take that lid off, or you just pretend it doesn't exist and compartmentalize and you just move on. And then when it builds up, you take it out on a kid because you know they have no defenses here. So yeah, there's lots of stories.
You mentioned a minute ago about like the I don't know what the right word is. The difficult relationship between having this sense of urgency to be exposing these things that are happening, but also you're currently a pastor's wife, and that puts you into some interesting places in terms of like what you feel you can say, what you can't. Like, what is the nature of that? Like that dichotomy between like, oh, I'm a pastor's wife. Obviously, he's trying to pastor in very different ways than I think the background, the IFB kind of background. What does that look like for you? And like, what do you feel is off limits for you in terms of what you're saying, or like, how does that play into it? Because like, obviously you're very outspoken. So I'm curious, like, what does that look like for you now? And how does that impact that position impact your advocacy?
Something I've had to learn coming out of it is nobody cares about your trauma. So if people start opening up, or if people start asking you specific questions, then you can share. But when you're coming out of a situation, you want to overshare with everybody, and then you're just trauma binging on people. So you just have to claim it up and don't tell people. And as a pastor's wife, something that I have to snuff out is my own identity, because everybody has a clear idea of kind of what a pastor's wife is. My husband goes out every week with the other pastors in the community, and once a month he goes out to a different church, in the Del Mar region, Delaware, Maryland, and he fellowships with pastors. But there's none of that for a pastor's wife. So I'm very familiar with and friendly with friends of all spectrums, and I love them all the same. I treat them with the respect that you're supposed to. It's biblical, number one, and it's simple human decency, number two. My own identity, things that I might want or would like to engage in, I have to snuff that out a bit, because that's not welcome. I compare it to all the pastors' wives I've ever known growing up, and they're silent, they're quiet, and they smile. Yeah. And I've had people get upset and leave the church and they blame it on the pastor's wife. But then you look at the statistics for that, and a lot of people, when they get disgruntled, even before they're going to decide to leave, they'll take it out on the pastor's wife, even for no reason. And so I've had times happen like, what? I don't, okay, well, I can't get offended about it. I do take personal stands sometimes. I try not to be on social media too much. I'm only on Facebook, though I have other accounts my husband runs, like fan pages, whatever. But I have to moderate what I do post and read it and reread it and reread it again. And so many times I've had big old lengthy posts and I've just deleted them before I even publish them. Because too many times I've had my husband call me, you put this, you really should take that down, or you should reword this, or do you want to say this? And I've had other people, and I can be proactive, but there's also a place for proactive. People don't want you to be proactive in their living room, but they could watch you on the TV as you're proactive in Northwest Indiana at a protest. Yeah. Like, that's fine. If they want to look for it, I'll be there, but not to bring it to everybody and just put it in their life. You have to take a stand. I just have to back up, conceal a little bit of who I am, conceal a little bit of what I want to do, what I want to be, and, just take it in stride that things are happening. We are evolving as a species. Humanity is evolving. We as a country are evolving. We're getting away from our roots, and we are becoming more progressive. And I stand for all those progressive things. But it's slow. You just can't throw in the towel and get mad and be mad all the time, because people aren't evolving and improving and progressing at the rate you want them to. But I know who I am. I know what I stand for. If I feel something needs to be said or shared, or there's a right moment, I'll do that. It's just with age, being a lot slower with it, a lot more observant, a lot more, does this need to be said? Is there some other channel, some other avenue, some other back door that I can go to make these improvements and progresses, rather than just, always taking to the same people or always taking to social media.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, there's a lot to unpack with that. Cause I feel like, when you initially were talking about like holding back some parts of identity, or like not sharing some things.
Muzzled.
Yeah. Like, I guess I had questions swirling about like, well, where do you feel that muzzle's coming from? Or like, what do you think that is? Cause to me, it sounds like that's how it was an Agape. And so like, I guess my immediate concern is like, well, where's that muzzle coming from? Or like, why aren't you allowed to speak about these things? But near the end of what you were saying, it sounds like it's you have the things that you care about, but you're in this delicate position where if and I feel this strain with the podcast sometimes, where it's like I have people who listen who are extremely conservative Christians who, if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, the progress they are making is like that cord snaps and they're not going to listen to anything else you have to say. On the other side, you need to also be pulling strong enough to where like you are opening people's eyes and you are snapping people out of it. Like, would you say that's closer to kind of like your mindset, where it's like I'm trying to deal with like the church people who are like stuck in this way of thinking. I'm also trying to embrace these people who are outside that realm without like proactively harming either one, and trying to help both get to a healthier or like better place. Like, it's kind of like a self-imposed, like,
With wisdom comes discretion.
Yeah, discretion. That's a good word for it. Yeah.
In my bullheadedness of this needs to change now, charging ahead. When you charge ahead, and other people in the blind eye movement will notice this and resonate with them, when you charge ahead like a bull in a china shop, you leave people behind. When you methodically place your steps and you use wisdom and discretion, you can effect greater change, not as rapidly, but longer lasting, and where it's not just myself going through, but I've now pulled people with me that don't just follow me, because I don't want people to just follow me, that see and their eyes are opened. Even if something happens to me to pull me out of the picture, I know other people are taking that cause forward. I had to sit back and realize one day when I was reaching out, trying to find someone on Facebook, why can't I reach out to her? I have this really, really good sharing with our minute. I had a question from college. I knew she'd be the one to answer, and we could, talk. And then I found out she's friends with my husband. She had blocked me, and we'd never had any ill words. I'd never even known what she posted. We never had any kind of interaction. But I realized my outspokenness was too much for her to handle, and she blocked me, and I lost her. And I don't know where she is now, but that influence I could have had on her is gone. And I had to realize, when I am too impassioned that I just make forward progress, I lose people. But at the same time, I have to stand for what I believe in. If you tell me what your pronouns are, I will use them. And I won't use them and behind your back change them how I feel you should be. I'll respect you. I'll call you by your name, the name you give me. I'll call you by your pronouns. And if I see someone or hear someone, no, that's not a he, that's a she, excuse me, that is very disrespectful, not around me. So when I have these moments where there is something to be said, I will say it. But I'm a lot slower and a lot more calm and analytical for when I need to outright say something.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be said.
Right.
If you say something 100 times a day, 100 days a year, people are not going to start caring after a while. You have to think of more logical ways to put your playbook into action. So I'm helping people at our church. I'm helping friends we know. I have people who I thought would never open up who are opening up. And it's just, oh, wow, these are shocking. It's not shocking because I grew up in this environment. So keep telling me, I can relate to you.
Yeah.
But this is where we can go forward. So a lot of discretion, a lot of you're muzzled, but at the same time, you're willingly muzzled because I could say anything I want and be anybody I want, but I'd be burning a lot of bridges behind me. And it'd be a lot of unnecessary, undue pain. But if I take it slower and the rate I want to and situational, then I won't have to worry about that. And I'd have a lot more people with me, kind of that aspect of the movement. So it's slow, it looks invisible, but it's still trudging forward.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad you mentioned that, like the being able to say whatever you want, but like it's hard. Like I'm somebody, I tend to like to charge ahead, and I like to, you know, and I think there's a place for both of those things too. Like again, this is, I didn't expect to talk about this, but it is such an interesting thing because everybody's got a different standard for what that looks like, and what that should mean. And I think there are the people who, blast ahead and bring the large scale awareness, but also lose the immediate relationships with some people that could need the help, but aren't there yet. They don't see it yet.
A ripple leaves greater lasting impacts than a firecracker.
Yeah.
Firecracker, done. But a ripple can be felt across the world.
Yeah.
Slow,
I think the biggest thing on that though, that like my fear for you, like hearing you describe this, is I think sometimes it's such a tightrope of like being held hostage by the expectations of others, to where you look back and go, oh, I have not been me for so long. And like, I guess that's like from my heart, a heart to heart thing that comes to mind here is like, I hope you don't lose yourself being what others need you to be, if that makes sense. Like, that's kind of like my concern. Cause like, that's where I always wrestle myself, is like, am I being too diplomatic to where I'm losing too much of myself, to where I have this identity crisis still of like, oh, I was trying to be this like diplomat for everybody else. I was trying to be this advocate for everybody else. Or I was trying to be perfectly in this zone for everybody else, that like I look back and go like, oh, I wasn't me, or I don't even know what makes me happy or comfortable, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's like, I don't know. That's
being a woman in the church, you're with that all the time, from the time you're born till the time you die. You're always under that. It's just who you're around. I'm being where I'm at, and the fact that certain people have left our church, and the church hasn't quivered, hasn't fallen, and it's gotten stronger.
Yeah.
I'm not. I have to remind myself I'm not at Agape. I'm not in Hammond, Indiana, and if they want that, they can just go down the road to that church, that we both know exists.
Yeah. I'm curious for shifting gears a little bit. I'm curious for like the protest in March where we got to connect, and like being back at First Baptist of Hammond in a very different way than going and attending a service many years ago. Like, what did that mean to you to be able to stand with, survivors of sexual abuse, and also people who were survivors of spiritual abuse, and people who were against their will taught to conform to this, super small box of what it means to be a woman, or to be a Christian, or to be a person in this environment? What did it mean to kind of like reclaim that space during the protest?
I knew going into it, no change is going to be affected here. But I also knew there's going to be a little Amanda out there who might be questioning.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be there for that person, that man or female or non-binary who knows whoever's at Hammond, Indiana, and they feel like they're suffocating under the rule of somebody else. And I'm going to be there for them. And I know FBC Hammond is not going to change. They're not. I talked to Pastor Wilkerson. I talked to Eddie Lapina. Both of them told me to stop talking. Both of them told me I don't want to hear it anymore. Both of them told me I'd rather be friends with our good sister ministry in Missouri. And then both of them pointed all the blame towards me and then started talking to my husband about how he can help the wife and how we both need to change our attitude and submit more and be more obedient to what God wants, which is drinking the Kool-Aid. And I wasn't going to do that. I knew I had talked to the leadership. I went up the ladder and none of that worked. None of that affected any kind of change. I knew the protest isn't going to do anything, but it's going to make me feel really good. I'm going to stand up with a lot of people and people need to say stuff. No. And people need to come forward. I know the lady who wasn't very appropriate with me when I was a little bitty girl, she revealed, oh yeah, I had stuff happen to me too. And I'm like, I know. Well, you're in that culture and that culture is happening and it's happening right here at FBC Hammond. I'd love, if Agape was still running, I would love to do something there, but, that's still happening. And I'm going to stand and seeing all these people and just supporting. I was approached by a classmate who said, I understand something maybe happened to you. And I understand that some people are hurt, but we're not that way. And I just looked her frank in the eye and I said, yes, you are that way. You are supporting them and you might be trying to be nice and bring us hot cocos and whatever, because we're cold out here, but you are supporting them because I'm telling you the leadership I took it to, you still follow that same leadership. Yeah. You're not demanding any accountability for the actions we have undergone. You're supporting them, but it made her feel good to say, I don't support any kind of behaviors, but still attending. Yeah. And to be there, it was really for the other survivors, for people who, quite a few people who reached out to me. I would love to go, but I just can't. And I know there's a lot of people who've come out of that kind of a religion, that kind of fundamentalism, who would have loved to be there, but they just couldn't. Whether it's work or finances or the more realistic, I can't be in that place anymore. I can't be. I panicked. I have turmoil. But showing up to the protest, this is the first time I had ever gone back to the Northwest Indiana region, and I didn't feel weighed down. I was enjoying it. I had no fear. No strings, no iron bars just forcing me to be something I wasn't. And I was looking like, it was like touring a place for the very first time, only I had other, experiences there. I got to eat lemon rice soup and have nostalgia without any of the oppressiveness, because I knew I'm not there anymore. And hopefully someone who's listening to this can realize you can come out of that oppressive situation and it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Just stand for what you believe in. And that's what I did. And that's what all those other people did. Yeah. A lot of tears at the protest, a lot of crying, a lot of people upset. And there was one individual, a man who wasn't saying anything. He was my older brother's age. And I remember him, from the schools there and from FBC Hammond, and he wasn't saying anything to anybody. He was there supporting with his family, his wife and stuff. But the pain in his eyes, I'm just like, and it was difficult. One lady came to me. She says, thank you. I'm not here for I'm here just temporarily for the protests and stuff. But, we were treated so differently after, her children had passed away, and so flippantly, and they just saw, and they were so much, they'd be the ones who'd kind of hand out the Kool-Aid to other people. They just believed and obeyed. And then when that horrible tragedy, I can't believe how many other people have been affected like that, and people who can't leave or people who have left. And it was everywhere, so many stories.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of those things like, for Wilkerson and Lapina, and all the leadership there, I told April a million times, I was like, and she knows. It was it's one of those things, again, we all have these conversations and it's we all know these things, but you have to say them. You're sitting together and you're like, they're not going to change anything. But there are the people in the pew who are, like you said, a young Amanda or I look at like a young Eric, or I look at like all these people who don't have the resources or even know, because I think when you're in that environment, like especially Hammond, where it's like such a massive compound, where it's like if you're in the dead center of that and you're looking around, that is your world. Like this is our block, this is my whole
Mm-hmm.
existence.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so empowering stepping into it from the outside, looking in and realizing like it has no power. Like once you step outside of it, there's no power over you. And I hope somebody there saw that, and people inside who are still stuck in it saw it, but also the people all standing on the outside saw it. Some for the first time really realizing like, oh, this place we were so scared of doesn't have any control now. And I think that's really, really powerful.
They had
Well,
me on the radio station, The Key.
oh, really?
My Faye Dotson, I've named after her, Amanda Faye. That she had me talk with her, and I remember they specifically told me before the radio broadcast went live, you can't talk about Agape. That's just we don't want you to talk about it. So they would censor. They told me what I could and couldn't talk about, and she's very much was directing it her path.
Yeah.
But looking back, and like I probably should have.
Yeah.
But they would have muted me. That's great.
So much has happened in the last couple years, and it's been interesting seeing like the amount of attention on First Baptist Church of Hammond, on Agape, the trouble tea industry as a whole, the IFB as a whole. We've talked a lot about like kind of picking your battles, or like when to like blast forward on something, or like what to shine light on next. For you right now, do you feel like optimistic or pessimistic about the state of things right now? And what do you think is the next thing, the next domino you want to see fall in this conversation? Like what do you want to see happen in 2025 in relation to the IFB or troubled tea industry, or both? What's kind of like top of mind for you right now?
I'm optimistic. I know that my church I grew up in, FBC Hammond of the 90s, would have definitely been exposed and wouldn't have survived the media onslaught if social media existed in their days, because too many people would have come forward with their stories, and too many people would have been able to corroborate the stories, be witnesses that people wouldn't have been able to ignore it, and they would have shuttered and they would have been closed down in the 90s. And I know social media is here now. People are not hiding when they've been abused. People are not burying things under the rugs. There are more and more ways to get words out there. There are more and more ways to connect with other survivors, ways to anonymously report things to news, or there are access to your fingertips of what laws are in your state, in your province, in your county. And I know that I'm very optimistic. Change is happening. And too many people are going to be realizing people out in the world are better to me than these Christians I grew up with, or these fundamentalists, or these Catholics, these Mormons, these fill in the blank. And more people are coming to the realization that it's better to be kind. And if someone's telling me something, but their service, their actions, their words don't match, then I don't need to believe them. I'm optimistic. Something I think that would really help is, this might be delusional of me, when we get a woman president. I'm very looking forward to having a woman president, because that will just turn this country on its head. I don't think great change will happen in the country per se. A president only has so much influence. A lot of other people have to back decisions. But I think when we have a female president, enough people are going to come out of the fundamentalist church and say, well, wait, if we could have a female president, why do you treat me like this?
Yeah.
Why do you say I can't do such and such because I'm a woman? I took it to a pastor once. I said, because you have I named our anatomy. I says, don't be crass. So I won't be crass here in the interview. But I said, because you have that and I have this, why can't we? Is a birth defect or something? No, God made you. Then why? I'm not here to subserviate myself and prostrate myself to you. And you're my pastor. You're not my husband. My husband's here, and you want me to obey him, obey you rather than him? It was ridiculous. If we get a woman president, I think a lot of people in religion are going to just wake up.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be a huge, in the religious realm, I think it'll be a very, very huge progressive movement. Yeah. Though in our country's politics, I don't think much will change. But That's a
The
big step.
symbolism
I'm a
of
big
it.
dreamer. Symbolistic, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down and chatting. It feels like just yesterday we were sitting down in Hammond in person talking, and
Kathy and
it's
April and all of them. Mhm.
yeah, and it's really it's cool. I think as a reminder, like if nothing else happens as a result of gathering for protests or doing things like that, like just being in the same room with people who I think are feeling the same things. Because I don't know, maybe this is just me just projecting myself, but like I feel so lonely so often, like thinking about these things, talking about these things, like, and it's not, you know, it's really nice connecting virtually and talking about it, but like being in person and seeing other people face to face and being able to give a hug to somebody that you know is across the country
Mhm.
trying to evoke change in the same way is really cool. So hopefully we get to do that again. But it's been really neat getting to reconnect through this conversation, and I hope we get to chat a lot more. I really appreciated it.
Yep. You're not alone.
Yeah.
People, if you're listening and you feel like you're alone, just remind yourself that's just a feeling. That's not a fact. The fact is there's a huge community of us out there. We're listening, our arms are open. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Go forward.